Welcome back to Full Circle. I'm Hilary Doyle. With the lowest tenure and highest turnover of any C suite position, for more than a decade, the conversation has focused on what CMOs need to do differently. But this framing misses something very important, which is that marketing doesn't operate in isolation. Access to data, technology, funding, product strategy, and measurement are responsibilities and accountabilities that sit across the leadership team. And this raises a broader question. For marketing to successfully drive enterprise growth, what needs to change across the rest of your C suite? Today, we shift the conversation from fixing the CMO to lining up your leadership team for consistent, sustainable, and scalable growth. We're joined by Catherine Laporte, Chief Digital and Marketing Officer at RONA, and by François Gaumond, National Marketing Practice Leader at Deloitte Canada. François, take us through the history. How is it that CMOs are so often made accountable for growth without actually owning the levers that could shape it?
Yeah, so marketing has always been accountable for the upper funnel growth, creating demand, building awareness, and bringing a customer into the funnel. But enterprise growth doesn't stop at demand generation. It depends just as much on pricing, product, store operations, and the end customer experience. That's why growth cannot sit in a single function. It's fundamentally a C suite shared accountability with the CEO being the ultimate owner. But for that to work, marketing needs to have a seat at the table with real influence, representing the customer lens in those decisions. Otherwise, organizations tend to default to product or operational priorities and miss the opportunity to align around customer value, which is ultimately what drives sustainable growth.
Now, to that point, Catherine, you've been with Rona since 2018. Until 2022, you were reporting directly to the chief merchandising officer. For anyone who needs a translation, that's the executive in charge of product strategy. Then your reporting changed. Tell us what happened, but also what it's meant for you in terms of your day to day.
Back in 2022, we were part of Lowe's Canada. So we were part of the overall Lowe's brand. And we were mimicking basically the structure that was done in the US, where marketing was part of the chief merchant. We could sense that the leadership was thinking that the CMO role needed to be elevated. So for me, and I think for the organization, it made a big difference in the sense of now we could talk about the customer, we could talk about the brand. And it was my own priority and my sole focus as I was sitting next to my peers to talk and defend my position in that regard. Not that the chief merchant would not think of that, but they had a lot of other things to bring to the table each time they would show up. And I think that's what made the big difference at the time.
Would you walk us through just what that process was like in terms of decoupling you from the chief merchant and giving your CMO position more agency and more of a direct flow through from customer to C suite?
Once again, I think we were in a unique moment in time at Lowe's Canada in 2022, where the chief merchant ended up exiting the organization. We were starting to think of what was the role of Rona versus Lowe's. So we had like multiple hats, and there was like multiple different individuals that were around the table and maybe in the first time in their position. And as we've learned about the sale, that's where really kind of the role of the CMO at the table really took its own essence. Because if, as you can imagine, in an acquisition, and as we were decoupling from the Lowe's organization, it was really important to start paving the path and having the strategy to see what will Rona be in 5 years. We needed a new product strategy. We needed a new digital strategy at the time where we had a new chief digital officer. So I think at the speed we were going at, nor our responsibilities, chief marketing officer was key in that transition.
Francois, why aren't more businesses making this change? Is there anything that ends up getting lost by adjusting the role of CMO and effectively elevating it, as was the case with Catherine?
Yeah, I think that most organizations don't make the shift because they are operating within either legacy structure around functions or because they're still pretty much product centric. where they see marketing as a cost center as opposed to being a growth engine or the growth driver or the growth architect for the organization. So expanding the CMO role forces a broader change in terms of decision rights, shared metrics, and ultimately how the C-suite collectively own growth. It's just not a marketing change, it's more an enterprise operating model change, and that takes leadership alignment. In terms of what's lost, very little if it's done right. You're not taking ownership away from product, finance, or operations. What you're really doing is you're elevating marketing to bring the customer lens into decisions. And that tends to lead to better trade offs, not weaker ones, because the organization is no longer optimizing in silos, but around customer value and growth. We're seeing this more and more with things such as like the shift towards customer centricity, loyalty programs, personalizations, e-commerce, where customer behaviors actually influence promotions, product assortment, and even in some cases, new store locations. So having that seat, that representation within the C-suite of the customer help to shift from being more product centric to being customer centric. But like I said before, it requires a bigger change in terms of shared accountability and better collaboration in the C-suite.
Catherine, Rona did move from being product centered to customer centered. You were at the heart of that change. Walk us through what this has practically looked like so that our listeners understand what to track within their own organizations.
I think we sometimes forget the strength of a brand and the importance of a brand within the ecosystem of a company and why customers actually engage with it. And I think for us that was pivotal. The brand needed to win if we wanted to win as an organization. And it's not to say that product is not important, but everybody sells something, and especially in our industry where most of our assortment is something you can find somewhere else. So if you think that everybody sells the same product, then how do you differentiate yourself in the market? In 2023, one of the biggest bet was RONA was a strong brand. It needed to succeed in the Canadian market. And therefore, we needed to have a strategy that was aligned with it in order to succeed in the market. And then everything else would follow. So as you think of that, then you're like, okay, for it to be a brand strategy, you need everything starts with the customer. So I think we were talking about metrics, but I think like nothing speaks louder than just looking at a segmentation, looking at the market opportunity, understanding which segment are we going to go after.
How did you choose?
For us at the time, we made the choice of going after the pro, after going after the contractor. So again, having the ability to sit at the table, present that opportunity, discuss it with peers, and then you have a product person that'll say, okay, so if we decide this is the market segment we're going after, what does it mean on the merchandising standpoint? Which brand am I going to double down on? Where is my assortment going to be different? How are we going to shape up the stores? So there's a position of leadership in the CMO in that role, but there's also the ambassador of the organization in that transformation. And I think that's one of the key lever that at least for us worked and rallied people behind. So it's not necessarily about holding my position, but having the position in a team that will succeed and go after the same objective.
So, how has your adjusted remit impacted Rona's outcomes? What can you look to or point to as proof that the change has been a positive one?
So the big difference, I think, is if we would have been under the previous organizational structure, I think maybe product would have trumped, or store layout, or planogram, or how we're going to go about it. The function would have led first versus what the consumer want first. So I think, again, like, what is our brand strategy? How are we going to show up in the market? How are we going to connect with the customer? What are the insights they're telling us? What are you looking for in terms of product, in terms of store, in terms of the digital experience? And therefore, being that quarterback and the voice of the customer around the table, that then we can debate. Doesn't mean we need to go and execute, but at least we know what the lay of the land is, and we know what our best foot forward would be if we think of the customer and we put him at the forefront of our strategy.
You, Catherine, have said that CMOs need to speak the same language as the rest of the executive team. Talk to us about what that language is, how you make the metrics that you're overseeing metrics that the rest of the team will care about deeply and perhaps start to track on their own.
From my own perspective, when I was younger or aspiring to be a CMO, I think there is a perception that CMOs often just talk about the brand and talk about the creative and talk about we want to do an ad campaign and we want this this spokesperson and we want this billboard. And it was hard to, I think, speak the same language of number and a spreadsheet, maybe around the executive table. I think the role of CMO has really evolved. And I think for me specifically, I think it was showing empathy to understand what mattered to my peers. What was the goal we were going after in terms of a metric, and what did my boss or my CEO or what does the leadership want to achieve overall as an organization? So, for example, you would hear around the table, we need more people to come to the stores. Okay, sure. So what does that mean? Okay, that means traffic. Okay, how do we generate traffic? Well, I need to generate X amount of impressions and I need some click through on my ads or digital advertising so that people can start seeing it. We have humongous dashboards. We have tons of metric, but I think it was recognizing and knowing what the metrics that were the most important to link back to the outcome we were looking at as an organization, educating my peers around these metrics and understanding why they were important. And then keep tracking these metrics and showing the cause to effect to my peers and to the organization so that they can see that, we're not just doing pretty things, but it was a combination and there was like science behind the madness.
François, I see you nodding. What would you argue are the priority metrics for CMOs to push or promote?
Yeah, I mean, some of those metrics that we're seeing in more customer-centric organizations would be around like customer lifetime value. So how much value are we getting from each and every single customers? Having a better balance between just pure acquisition versus acquisition and retention. Basically, how many customers are you retaining? Are they coming back? Versus just kind of what I call like acquiring to fill a leaky bucket. Every organization has a leaky bucket, but like, is it big? Is it small? The smaller it is, the less you need to fill it back in order to kind of still have that growth effect. And I guess when you get to those more holistic, perhaps, metrics of lifetime value, net retention rate, you have a better understanding of your top line. Is it growing because of pure net new acquisition? Or are you better at cross selling, engaging, retaining your customers so they come back more often?
Francois, what are you seeing across your practice in terms of the best approaches for marketing to take when it comes to that customer retention?
It's really, it boils down to understanding and listening to your customers. And again, I think this is where it's becoming critically important for the CMO to have a seat in the C-suite, because it's not only about the products anymore. It's really about understanding who they are, what they like, how they behave, where do they shop, where do they get inspired, and be able to really um, develop like personalized and contextualized value proposition for your customers. The more and the better you know them, the more and the better you can market them.
Do you see specific examples where organizations unintentionally set their marketing executives up for failure?
Yeah, I think one of the common traps that when you devalue the marketing function, the customer voice passes through someone else's priority before it reaches the CEO and the rest of the C-suite, right? When marketing is just responsible for execution, the customer needs might not be properly represented within the corporate strategy and action. And the scorecard of what we're tracking from a marketing standpoint, it's mostly just marketing metrics. And quite frankly, that's where you would marketing, generally speaking, would be seen as a cost center as opposed as a growth driver.
Okay, well, when it comes to traditional cost centers, Catherine, how important is the old guard ad campaign today in the context of an organization like yours?
The causality between like the investment and the results is just not as direct as other channels. And in the world, especially of retail, when you look at your day sales, your week sales, your month, your quarter, like the importance of speed to market is key. And therefore, often we're impatient and we're looking for the metrics or the initiatives that will drive that immediate response. But if you think of an ad campaign, you know, build a commercial, put it on air, choose your channel. It's actually lasting longer than maybe some of the other tactics. So I still believe in it. I think though it's in the channel that you execute it, and it's the message that needs to be clear. And that's why I think your peers also need to follow the talk, so that the message that you're conveying in these ads are actually materializing in whatever the channel or the promise you're giving the customer.
Yeah, I would like to add on that. I think if you devaluate the marketing function by putting it under another one, this type of message of the brand impact, the sustainable brand impact, is not necessarily being shared well enough at around the table where decisions are made, right? And it could be seen as just being like something that we can cut easily because we cannot have like a direct correlation about like there was an ad this weekend, did it impact the sales the next day? I think it's harder to make that direct correlation, but like you could absolutely measure overall sustainable brand impact, right? And if we look at where we're going in terms of like shopping experiences and customer experience with the advent of Gen AI and eventually like where there's a bit of a disintermediation that's going to happen. I think in that context, brand investment and having a strong brand is going to be even more important because you will want people to either purposely ask for your brand or based on the answer they will be getting, they'll be like, hold on, but I actually want to have that specific brand because of what the brand stands for.
So the disintermediation enabled by Gen AI and search will continue to present a great opportunity for brands. And Catherine, we've spoken about these levers of growth that CMOs haven't always had access to or dominion over. We've also talked about the expansion of the CMO role. I'm wondering what the additional remits are that you'd argue need to be a part of this expanding CMO portfolio.
I mean, I would be lying if I wouldn't say that digital makes total sense if you look at my title. But I think, especially based on what François just mentioned, if you think of how the customer is searching today, or how the customer is interacting, digital is becoming most of the time the first entry point with a brand or with a product. And therefore, if you don't control or if you don't influence highly that experience and don't have the customer in mind in that experience specifically, I think you're missing out on one portion of it. So in my specific case, and I think as François just mentioned, which I think is super interesting, is if you think now of the power of the LLMs and how your brands show up. And again, we know it's always a bit of a black box, but we know that content, the way your site is built, the reputation of your brand, there are key points that are highly linked with the digital experience and the overall digital ecosystem that needs to be true in order for you to succeed in your role as a chief marketing officer. So to me, it's just the natural expansion. And I have to say that I've been in this role for a year, and I think it's the best. I think it's the best position today to be in the face of AI and the LLM and how shopping is evolving, to make the best decision for the organization. Because going back to your initial question of what's the difference of being under a chief merchant versus sitting at the table, I think today would be the same thing, sitting at that same table, having, healthy debates with my peer, the chief digital officer. But as I own both, I can come back and make recommendation in for the customer and for the organization, thinking of both channels or all the ecosystems together.
I'll put this final question to both of you then. For CMOs listening who are looking to evolve in the way that you have, Catherine, what are the priority adjustments that they can make to shift perception from cost center to revenue generator when it comes to the marketing department?
We're supposed to be the best at understanding the customer. So let's start understand what our peers want around the table and what drives them and what are we trying to achieve overall as an organization as a common goal. I think the second thing is, how do you translate these in the KPIs that you master and you own and influence on a daily basis? And how do you merge the two so that it's clear for your peers how your work is impacting our bigger goal as an organization or as a brand? And I think as you do that, then it's seeking allies around the table to help further achieve these objectives. Whereas it's through sales, through store execution, through merchandising, to the right product, the value, and what you need to be true in order to deliver on the KPI that you said you would go and deliver. So to me, I think it's a lot of communication and influence in a position of expertise, and also knowing when you're wrong, and also knowing when to put one knee down when it's time to maybe give back money because you know it's not the best dollars to be invested in as an organization.
From my perspective, it's a team sport, right? And everyone needs to work together. And in order for everyone to work together, I think it needs to be seen as everyone has the same voice at the table. One is representing customer, products, or operation, finance, and so on and so forth. But there has to be a shared accountability or shared metrics, because growth will only happen for all of these functions to be working together in one goal, which is serving the customers and creating better experiences for our customers. At the end of the day, that's what growth means, is that customers are happy, they're coming back, and they're buying again, and they're buying more. So in order to do that, everyone has to work together as like equal peers within the C-suite. I would say this is really kind of where the key and where the magic's happening.
Catherine Laporte, François Gaumond, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
The question that both François and Catherine would have you consider is, what drives growth in your business today? Is it your products or your customers? For RONA, focusing on brand and customer segmentation has allowed the organization to build meaningful market differentiation with a shared strategy that the whole C-suite can understand, measure, and ultimately contribute to. Ask whether your customer insights are active in shaping strategy across the organization, or whether they're rolling in to impact the marketing campaigns after key decisions have already been made. The world has changed, discovery has changed, and as François points out, a lot of companies are still filling a leaky bucket rather than focusing on customer lifetime value and net retention rate. Here's the place to start. Look at your growth metrics. Are they rewarding acquisition alone, or do they measure the long-term value of customer relationships? Because your CMO is well positioned to influence those metrics. The takeaway: CMOs need to be shaping strategy alongside the rest of the leadership team. So if they're not currently sitting at the table, it's time to get a bigger boardroom. Thank you to our guests, and thanks to you, as always, for listening. We love to hear from you. You can reach us anytime at circleback@deloitte.ca, and please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.